Thank you.
Thank you, Jerome.
Well, good morning, everyone. Are we all awake? Should I make you all stand up and sit down one time? Okay. Well, greetings from inside the Beltway. I want to thank the committee for having me back. I was here last year, and I cannot emphasize enough the importance of these gatherings because it brings together the people that are currently working in the areas of Thousand Cankers disease and emerald ash borer. I work for the U.S. Forest Service, and my responsibilities include non-forested areas and private areas and public areas. If you added up all the acres that we look after, it's about 700 million. Primarily, the Forest Service is working on fires. You hear a lot about Smokey Bear for some reason, and so a lot of our dollars are tied up in fighting fire. But we have this agency and this unit and division that I work in is the State and Private Forestry Group, where we contend that there's about 423 million acres that are in private lands that are out there. So it's here we run into not only our bugs and crud on the national forest system, but we also run into bugs and crud in cities, homeowners, woodlots, what have you. So you can see here showing this green area is mostly privately owned forests. The orange is showing you what is the public lands. And I think it's a great place to watch how things go out there every year as far as insects and disease are concerned. I like fire too, but I like that in having a nice fire out on a camping trip. My primary responsibilities in Washington is to inform these fellas. That's Secretary Vilsack, that's Chief Tom Tidwell, and that's the Deputy Director of State and Private, Jim Hubbard. Any given day, these guys can be called up to the Hill, as we call it, and they will be grilled by folks that sit above them in these areas here. I'm usually sitting back here somewhere, kind of trying to be small, but my job is to make sure that the importance of TCD and other pests is on their minds when they are going to be asked questions by Congress or subcommittees who are trying to decide, well, how much money should we give you for this? I thought I'd start out by giving you an overview, because if we look at expenditures in a given year, we see that human and health and human services occupies almost $1.2 trillion of our annual federal budget. This is followed by defense, treasury, labor, and we get down to agriculture, which has about $200 billion. And I say that kind of like, what does $200 billion look like? If you were to put it in a room, how big would it be? And I used to think in terms of $5. Now we have these huge numbers, and sometimes it's hard to make sense out of them. But what I wanted to point out here is that our budget comes out of the interior budget, and that is typically about $4 billion for the Forest Service, most of which is used to support our efforts to deal with fire. And that was designed by Teddy Roosevelt and Mr. Gifford Pinchot, that our money would come out of there. So the Forest Service takes about $4.2 billion a year from the total budget. But what it shows you is that people care about their health. If you take away the hype that you've been seeing in the news lately, if you take away politics, that's hard to do, you find out that the expenditure sort of explains how we think that in terms of priorities and importance. So we want to be healthy, we want to be well defended, we want a strong dollar, and we want to eat something or have a job that we can go purchase food through agriculture. And so these things make sense that way. Is it enough money? Is that enough money to take care of everything we need to take care of? I'm here today to tell you the answer is no. Can always use more. But it puts it in perspective when you try to put diseases and insects in context with all of the other things that are going on. One thing I have noticed of late is that I'm trying to build a case constantly out in Washington for Jim Hubbard and Chief Tidwell on, is TCD important? And I want to emphasize that I think it's time for us to revisit its importance, especially with our state foresters. They recently just came out with their annual review, and I've searched it in embracing the possibilities. I went from front to back. TCD is not mentioned in here. I think we have a tremendous opportunity to get involved with this group, because together they are a bigger collective and have a really good influence on our chief. So some of the things that they were concerned about this past year was the Farm Bill, appropriations, wildland fire, forest roads. They made 91 visits to the Hill. They wrote 16 letters. They are working with coalitions across the country and may even get drawn in to give expert testimony. This is a group that I think is being underutilized. They seem to be more powerful outside of their states than they are within, or as a group. So we need to tie the TCD story to their forest health, or forest science and health committee, which exists. Does anybody know who the chair of that is? What state forester? Okay, I can see. The great state of Connecticut. Anybody here from Connecticut? They came by last week to pay us a visit, and these visits are cordial, but usually have something to do with money and what they're thinking is important. I think a concerted effort needs to be made to reach this committee, and that can be done through your state foresters. So when they're together, they're a big bunch. If you're just one person trying to make a difference and coming out to DC, that's a good thing. You may get some tickets to the Senate and the House, but it really comes down to numbers. And this group is the one that I think need to strengthen our, I won't call it lobbying. I have to call it, we inform. You can figure out the rest. Well, what do we know at this point? We have about 16 states that have confirmed TCD within them, so those state foresters need to be made aware, and especially the ones that have, in this orange area, that have some sort of regulation. They're probably aware, but they're not totally behind it when they get together to make it to this national type level of importance. So you can see here that these are the states then that now have internal quarantines as well, and we welcome Ohio and North Carolina this year to our list. This list keeps growing, but here are the state foresters that need to form some coalition to make a difference to keep our TCD program going. Also important to note that there are about 26 states that have black walnut in them. I think this is a conservative estimate. This is a forested estimate, and Jerry Van Zambik helped put this together, but you can see that Missouri obviously has some concerns. And I think the state foresters that have things going that have something to do with agroforestry are also very, very important. This past year, the USDA released a first-of-a-kind report to America on agroforestry. I like this picture here. It shows the river running through it, rows and rows and rows of trees, shelter wood, all of these things, and then a forest back here. All of these things need to be emphasized as important to the state forester, because if we're going to make investments in this type of methodology, we've got to protect that investment that we have in walnut. So shown here, you can see that there are various approaches to this, and I think it's, the report says we're not doing such a good job. We have maybe 1% of the available land that's out there that is been utilizing money, and it broke down something like this. The Farm Service Agency, of course, provides about $237 million to agroforestry. Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS, about 25%. And then down here is the Forest Service. So we are interested, and I think that there in the future is going to be some more dollars, especially if the Farm Bill does get passed. Somewhere in that legislation is tucked away on page 2052, somewhere in there, we will see some dollars that could come down. And I am arguing that we need to try to get involved with this in making TCD important, because a lot of this agroforestry is done with black walnut. If you've not seen this booklet, Profitable Farms and Woodlands, this is a great way of trying to get some ideas on how, and there are all these real life stories about farmers who have adopted these practices, and some of the successes and some of the challenges that they're currently faced with. So I think as we build the case for why is TCD important, we need to emphasize agroforestry. We need to emphasize to the state foresters how much they have of the walnut resource at risk. In addition, I also have a challenge in trying to explain walnut to Jim or Tom Tidwell or Secretary Vilsack, because it's hard to imagine walnut as a commodity. You've got the nut component and you've got the lumber component, but when you start talking to folks, a lot of them don't understand how that matches up with all the other hardwood markets that are out there. So in this recent study in 2011, someone went out and queried a lot of these mills and lumber production folks, and to find out what percentages are there, and they looked at the years 2004 to 2008, and what occupies this hardwood market. Redwood seems to be king, but seems to be declining. White oak follows. It also seems to be declining. Interesting to note that ash, even in the presence of emerald ash borer, took an increase in the market from 2004 to 2008. I'd like to know, I apologize I don't have 2012 here, but it would be nice to know what the long-term implications of that in the presence of EAB are. And black walnut, surprisingly, has increased by 30% in terms of lumber output board foot basis. But again, these things only occupy about 5% of the total hardwood markets. So these kinds of stories are important for me to be able to tell the story that why is walnut important? Well, it's growing in production, and it's very important to us because its value is very high. So $5 to $10 for a board foot. I didn't know what a board foot was until I walked into sort of Home Depot or Lowe's and had someone sort of explain it to me, but it can be in any form, 12 by 12, 4 by 2 by 4s, by 18, 6 by 6. But now I'm starting to imagine what that is. And this is the most important feature, $5 to $10. So walnut is king compared to oak at $4 to $8, ash $2.50 to $5, and maple 25 cents to $1.50 per board foot. Now these numbers are things that I just collected, but I would appreciate any help I can get from the industry so that I can tell the story better, any of these comparisons, because it's like comparing apples to oranges sometimes. They don't see it in board feet, and they can only think in terms of sort of one thing, and they get this look when this pathologist comes walking up to them and says, oh no, here he comes. He's going to talk about sickness and death and doom and gloom, and I have to be able to articulate the apples from the oranges. Speaking of oranges, the APHIS group and a lot of that side are heavily involved in citrus canker and citrus greening. This occupies a lot of their budget time. U.S. Forest Service doesn't have much. It's caused by a bacteria that forms a slimy culture. I used to be a pathologist. I can say that with confidence. And it's killing off citrus. Now, when these guys come into town or to Washington, they have an economic number or an economic impact that's directly attributable to this pest. And it would be nice to have that for Thousand Cankers disease, not just the number of how many things are out there and a potential, but an actual impact to the industry. And again, it makes the fruit taste really bad, and for us pathologists, we get all excited about ooze. So everybody say ooze. Ooze, okay. I'm sorry, just seeing if you're awake. So if that's not bad enough, I lay up at night and think about things that aren't even here yet. I don't know if you guys talked about this yesterday, but there's this thing going through the UK right now called Cholera ash dieback. And the implications from this particular disease, this is a fungus, it's nice and furry in culture, It's produced in these conidiophores, and you get these small little conidia that form these chains, but causes a dieback of ash, as if ash didn't have it bad enough with EAB. The questions that I'm asking, should this thing show up in the U.S., is what are we going to do about it? How much of our allocations for forest management are we going to put towards it? Here you can see this is a field that's not unlike what I used to see in George O. White Nursery in Missouri when emerald ash borer first broke. A lot of that production was simply stopped or pulled up. Well, this is in Europe, and this guy is currently suing the British government because he's had to dig up and plow under all these ash trees. So it's millions of dollars, and he's contending that the government knew that this was a problem in Czechoslovakia and Poland and other places, and they chose to not put the proper phytosanitary regulations in place, and this thing came, and now they are chasing Callara ash dieback to see what its logical conclusions will be. Another thing that I wanted to point out, that if you didn't talk about it yesterday, is the polyphagous shot hole borer. This is carrying around my friend a fusarium, and they look like this. But the two things concern me about this problem. It's a vascular tissue problem, so this beetle is capable of delivering the fungus in its mycangia. It's small like the walnut twig beetle, small little hole, and it causes xylem problems, and you can see it's aptly named for this shot hole borer type of appearance. Now, the question I ask at night, late at night, is what impact will this have on black walnut or regia, Juglans regia, since it impacts 110 different plant species. It's in California right now. Again, the question becomes, how concerned and how much allocation should we put towards something like this versus something like TCD? So we have TCD, and we've got a beetle and a fungal interaction, and we have a phloem that looks beautiful with 1,000 cankers, and it makes me excited every time I see it. What are the implications, and what legs does it have to stand as a program? So right now we have a lot of problems with homeowners. There's an impact there. There's a potential impact to all the agroforestry that's out there. There's also a potential impact to the forests themselves, and I'm happy to see all these posters over here that are starting to address some of these things. We are making some progress, but in context with how the money is doled out and partitioned, we always have to make our case, and the tools we need to make that case are strength in numbers and people that can carry out the research and take care of business. Well, I'll just review for you, since I get to be the first guy to go. The TCD timeline was first identified as something going on in walnuts in the Espanola Valley in New Mexico, which looks something like this. Riparian corridors with Arizona walnut were being impacted, and large areas of some of these outplantings of black walnut started showing up in Colorado. And from about 2004 to 2011, it's just one find after another, and people started connecting the dots. To a great extent, Whitney and Ned have done the lion's share of work on bringing this to someone's attention. In response, the complex was defined as the beetle and the fungus having to interact together, and the fungus was actually new to science. That precipitated our summit in Missouri. How many people went to the Missouri Summit? We got a few of you. Good to see you again. From there, we had representatives from industry, state and local, and federal government to come together to try to talk about what are we going to do about this. And at that time, we only knew of it existing in Colorado. We certainly didn't want it to come east, but Knoxville helped us out in 2010. So you guys remember Gray's day when he had TCD and EAB almost in the same week. He was inconsolable, so we had to pat him on, and yet Tennessee now then has emerged as the leader on these two particular problems, so I want to compliment you on that. And this fungus then got its name about 2011. We welcomed Virginia and Pennsylvania to the fold, and the framework actually came out fairly quick. And much of what was put in that framework is still going on today. So this is from my start, when I got out to the Forest Service in about 2008, I've actually been very pleased at seeing things go. You know, government's pretty slow to begin with, but it's fun when you see things actually come together and start to see the production of good research and the challenges that people are taking on. We were able to get this pheromone deployed and do a lot with that. Dr. Seibold developed that, and the survey now in 2011 was mostly visual, which I still contend was a good approach, but the pheromone helped focus our attention on areas that are in areas where the walnut twig beetle is confirmed. We welcomed North Carolina and Ohio with TCD in 2012 and 13. And then, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but just this week, I think it came out, an international find that includes both the walnut twig beetle and the fungus, Geosmithia morbida, in northeastern Italy. So now it has come to the international realm. So a lot of things have had to come into play, and I've been very pleased with the collaborative nature of the folks working on this, and I want to continue to encourage you to go for this kind of thing, because it really does make a difference when we have to state our case for TCD. We started right out with 5 things. We wanted to know, okay, how can we prevent this thing? Well, some would argue that we didn't do much, but we have 16 states that have regulations in place right now. What effect does that have? Well, you can argue both good and bad. We heard last year from Pennsylvania that, you know, it really put a burden on that county and the people that were trying to move wood within that county. So that's one thing, is to prevent. The next thing is to detect. And so we've gone ahead with developing this trap. And so as this time goes on, TCD is going to probably increase in various areas. And the cost to control that after it's been in a place for a long time is also going to increase. But we went with our plan to prevent, to detect, to contain or treat. And last year you heard Bud Mayfield talk a little bit about some of the things that we can do with the wood now, that with fumigation and heat and steam treatment. And then we moved into more research. It's always a never-ending thing to go out and do research and methods development. So there's a lot of movement that's going on there. And then long-term, we have to think in terms of, is there such a thing as resistance? Is there such a thing as biocontrol? So I think our reaction was normal, and it's probably the same reaction we'll go through with these other things that I've mentioned, if and when they show up. But we need to always be mindful that it's a story that we tell. Here's just an overview of what was contributed by Forest Health Protection from 2009 to 2013. You can see we're kind of slow in getting started. We're up here around $300,000 a year, and this goes to fund those things of prevention, detection, containment, research and methods development, and outreach. And outreach is so important. That's why we're having these kinds of gatherings, so that we can take our message forward. And so APHIS has been involved through the Farm Bill, and I'll say a little bit more about that later in the talk. It's been involved, pretty much, and we've been very happy to have them at the table with us. But in honesty, and blunt, if I'm blunt about it, how does that stack up against citrus greening? How does that stack up against oranges dying from citrus canker? So now I'm just going to highlight some things that this is not my work, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some research updates. These slides were provided to me by Dr. Jenny Jesuik, who extends her best wishes. She wished she could be here, but first thing she drew my attention to was that some of the methods development that they're working on are these beetles, fungi on walnut twig beetles. It ain't all Geosmithia morbida, all right? So here you can see fungal cultures that have come off of the backs of these beetles that have been collected. And so she's been very interested in what are these things and what are they doing in this thing we call thousand cankers disease. Well, in addition to finding the causal fungus and fusarium, she's somewhat arrived at the conclusion that the walnut twig beetle might not be a likely vector. for Fusarium, but she's really been honing in on the aspects of the insect pathogens, such as this fungus here and Fusarium. These are known to be pathogens on insects, and so she's trying to figure out ways to figure out if there's some use that we can use these against the walnut twig beetle. In addition, she's discovered some fungal parasites, and these are known as mycoparasites, so that's a fungus against a fungus. So the long-term implications of these kinds of things take time, but may afford us some better management of the disease once it shows up. She also wanted me to point out that Geosmithia cankers, lesions, discoloration on stressed black walnuts, it ain't all Geosmithia morbida. So here she has some cankers that have formed under the bark from some samples that she's taken in Minnesota. And there's some very interesting things that may be coming off of this work. And so we're very interested in seeing what are the insects that are involved, what are the fungi that are involved. In fact, we may actually find out that it's a whole host or cadre of fungi that are involved in causing these cankers. They're also been working. Is Adam here? Adam? Okay. Jenny has been working with Bud Mayfield and Adam Taylor here at the University of Tennessee to see whether or not this Botanigard ES, which is a biocontrol insecticide, could be used to control walnut twig beetles when an infestation is underway. And so she's put the lure on these bolts, put the product on there, and compared it to permethrin and water as a control, and is finding that there are some very interesting results, although she wouldn't quite tell me what those were just yet because she has not published, but they're finding interesting things. And just because I put this up here doesn't mean we're endorsing it. We're just testing it. So I have to put this disclaimer up there that, we're not out there to try to sell anything. But it is interesting that her work has taken her in this direction. One of the things she was having difficulties with was trying to get enough beetles from different parts of the United States to test out whether there are differences with the fungi that she's finding on beetles from the east versus, say, the west. So she's working toward that and trying to get that taken care of. Dr. Seibold, I spoke with him this past week. He's been very interested since this international find has come about to raise awareness of TCD at the international level. He was up at a conference in Banff here just recently, and so a lot of his work and the people that work with him is intent on looking at the northern extent of walnut twig beetle finds in the United States. And this is just taken from a poster they presented up there that in 1960 the walnut twig beetle was believed to be here, and now in 2013 he's piecing together the map of where we think it is now. That could change, but his northernmost point is right here where he's gotten a walnut twig beetle in northern Idaho. And he's even surveyed all the way up in Loomis, Orville in the Okanagan, way up here, but they did not find any walnut twig beetles. He also wanted me to point out that they are improving the lure itself to try to make it more attractive to and more specific to the walnut twig beetle. So there's a lot of that type of work that's going on. In addition, he has folks that are working on spore load and how much impact, how many walnut twig beetle bites does it take to kill a branch. So he's been quite instrumental in all of this. So the northernmost point is north of Coeur d'Alene from his work, and they hope to continue and write that up here. And I'm also very encouraged that a lot of publications are now starting to make their peer-reviewed, making their way onto the good papers. Well, last year and the year before, we've been doing this survey. Forest Health Protection directly gives dollars to support states in their efforts to survey. So we have a forestry side and we have an ag side. We're concerned with the forestry side. This is very preliminary, but you can see that we're waiting on Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, and confirmation here in Indiana. And so it's very sparse. It's just starting to trickle in because a lot of folks are just finishing up their survey season. And so we like to track down wherever the dollars went. We like to get those points. In addition, it would be nice to get, and at this meeting last year, I was able to come in and talk to some folks from various states to get their sample sizes and it's not so much their locations and whose backyard it's in, but how many traps that they set. And so we look at the CAPS data. We are also working with Julie Spalding at APHIS in Riverdale to get the data to us that's gone into their thing called IFIS. And this is a whole new database that they're working with. And I'm hopeful that we can eventually tell the whole picture. Finally, education. We've been very good, protect the forest, TennesseeForest.org. We've got a website called 1000 Cankers Disease. You just type in 1000cankers.com and up comes this page. And you can see Tennessee is well placed here. We've got this 3rd annual conference that's coming on. So we try to keep this thing rolling and going. Some of the key points that I wanted to raise here is that we get about 300 new visitors to this site each month, about 150 returning visitors each month. And these tend to spike when TCD News is out there and in the media whenever there's an announcement from a state agency about a quarantine. There's a lot of interest. And now with this international find, we think there's probably going to be an additional spike. They spend about 3 to 5 minutes. They link to us directly through the web, through state DNR pages, and we appreciate the fact that you have these on your links. Walnut Forestry organizations. The traffic is about 57% from Google searches, 18% that have been navigated directly to it, and 5% from both Bing and Yahoo. In addition, this past year, we were able to do some seminars, much like we're doing today with a recording. Actually, we used Adobe Connect, where we could actually sit in our pajamas and give our talk. And there are some people in this room, and I want to personally thank you for making this a success. Last year, we had one in March where we talked about all that was to be known, and a lot of the more pertinent information was already gathered up for states, and so it was a pretty easy thing. But we had about 200 people visit into this webinar, as well as international folks that queued in, and we had no idea how many people might be just sitting there watching in live feed situations. We got a little more specific in April, where we looked at what's going on out there, what's new with the survey, what are the problems, and then we kind of wrapped up with research in May of 2013. Now the question is, do we do this again? I got to tell you, it's fun to put one of these together, but it's a lot of work. And if you don't have a really talented group of people behind the scenes working out the kinks and bugs, it's even harder. But we did have the EAB University help us on this, and Adobe Connect now wants to sell us a software package because we touted it as this was a great way to get this across to people and reach a lot of people with information. So this site is very current, very useful, and I encourage you to go to these webinars, and if you want to pick up more information that you maybe missed out on, you certainly got a chance to go and see it again. Well, the thing that's making the big news right now, 1000 Cankers disease, twig beetle in Europe. And I'm hopeful that northern Italy is someplace I can travel to. I'm not holding my breath, but it's a place that I have never been. But yes, they do grow black walnut, and that's important to them. And now that we have it internationally, what does this mean for our markets? What does this mean for phytosanitary considerations? I think we're just going to start to see a renewed interest in 1000 Cankers disease. If you're really worried about 1000 Cankers disease, I might suggest one other thing. All of these people share in common something that's called insurance. When I grew up on a farm in North Dakota, we had crop insurance. And so I decided, well, is it possible to get crop insurance? I mean, if, she can get it for her teeth at $10 million. Tom Jones can get it for his chest hair for $7 million. Rod Stewart for his voice. There's Heidi for 2.2 million just for her legs, and J-Lo and Dolly and Keith Richards' finger, So it is possible, and the USDA does have a program that allows you to put some insurance against losses that might be occurred. But primarily the ones that you see here shown here for last year is all for the nut producers who want to be sure that if something catastrophic happened, it wouldn't be a total loss. So I put that out there as a bit of good news. They have these actual insurance policies. You can look them up and figure out, and maybe it's possible we can get lumber as a commodity in something like this as well. I'll leave you with this. The open period for 10-201 started on the 20th of November. It's going to run through January 3rd. So if you have suggestions that you'd like, I know of a few people that work on the Pest Disease Analysis and Survey Committee, and they tend to see a lot of things from boxwood blight to everything, white pine blister rust, you name it, it's there. But a lot of folks have been successful at getting something for TCD. So I think, in summary, we're not done. We're not there yet. We need to figure out a way to make sure that we're telling the right story, that we've got good knowledge and information base to base that on. And yes, we're never going to have enough dollars to throw at it, so we actually have to prioritize what those dollars are going to go for. I'll close there, and thank you.